Hello and welcome to our Jigsaw Education Group webinar, Collective Worship Made Clear, Guidance, Myths and What Really Works. My name is Sarah and along with my colleagues Georgia and Jerry, I'll be guiding you through ideas and best practice for collective worship. We'll be drawing on our experiences from a range of schools including Church of England schools, Catholic primary schools and community schools as well. Firstly, we'll start off by going through the statutory guidance for collective worship in England, Scotland and Wales. We'll look at and unpick a couple of myths and misconceptions around what collective worship is and how it should work in schools. Then, as I said, we'll explore best practice and share our own experiences across a range of different school settings. And finally, we'll share some of the Jigsaw RE resources and support to help you implement brilliant collective worship in your school. I'm going to start by sharing these aims for collective worship, which are taken from the DfE circular from 1994, which is really the most up-to-date guidance that we have about what collective worship should be and how it should be managed in schools. Now, if you're putting together a collective worship policy or reviewing and updating a current one, this might be something that you would like to draw on when you're thinking about your aims for your school setting or your intent. So it says collective worship in schools should aim to provide the opportunity for pupils to worship God, to consider spiritual and moral issues, and to explore their own beliefs, to encourage participation and response, whether through active involvement in the presentation of worship or through listening to and joining in the worship offered, and to develop community spirits, promote a common ethos and shared values, and reinforce positive attitudes. We're going to focus on what is currently required for schools in England, Wales and Scotland. Although the curriculum for Wales was updated more recently, collective worship sits outside the curriculum, so it remains subject to the existing legal requirements from 1994. So there's a lot of different requirements and papers they've come from. An overview of that is on the handout we will give you. But there are main ones that relate to maintained schools, special schools, sixth form colleges in terms of right of withdrawal. In Wales, there's a Welsh circular as well. And then in Scotland, there are an Education Act, and then there's a more recent document about withdrawal, which was just published earlier this year. So the details of all of those are on the handouts that we'll provide. But in early 2026, the government announced it would update the guidance on collective worship for English schools, but there were no plans to change the law. And this update has not yet been published, so we wait to see what that looks like. So in the meantime, the headline is maintained schools in England and Wales, and this does also apply in Northern Ireland, must provide daily collective worship for all registered pupils aged 5 and over and promote their spiritual, moral and cultural development. Now, there's no specific requirement for this to be at a particular time of day, and the groupings of children, for example, whether it's whole school or key stage or year group, that can be varied during the week. There's no stipulations on those, and there's no requirement about how long each session should last. So a slight difference in Scotland, where collective worship firstly is termed religious observance, and the wording is regular rather than daily, but there is a minimum requirement of 6 times per year. We're now going to look at some of the key elements from the statutory guidance. If you want more detail on any of these, look at pages 20 to 25 of the DfE circular from 1994. So one of the main points is that collective worship is required to be wholly or mainly of a broadly Christian character. Now, exactly what that means, Jerry is going to talk a little bit about later. But in the meantime, if you are a school without a religious designation, you can seek exemption from the requirement for daily worship to be mainly Christian in nature. This is called a determination, and it's made to your local SACRE, or if you're an academy or a free school, it's made directly to the DfE, but that's only after consultation with your governing body. Now, if you are a school with a religious designation, you can provide collective worship in line with your religion. So the National Society for Education, which covers schools designated as Church of England or Church in Wales, they have collective worship guidance available on their website. And the Catholic Education Service provides the Catholic Prayer and Liturgy Directory to Love You More Dearly. Both of these are linked on the handout from this webinar, so if that relates to your school, both of those are worth a look if you're not already familiar with them. So arrangements for collective worship must be made by a school's head teacher or governing body. So what this means in reality is that sometimes the head teacher might take on the role of collective worship lead within a school. Sometimes it can fall to the RE lead and be part of their job as well. And I know that for us on this webinar, we've kind of held both roles at different times, but it must be made really clear that RE and collective worship are two different things. One is a curriculum subject. There should be two different policies. So if you are holding both roles, you need to be really clear about the boundaries between them. And the right of withdrawal is something that comes up a lot. So parents and carers, a bit like with curriculum RE, can withdraw their children wholly or partly from collective worship. Now, Year 12 and Year 13 pupils at an all-through school can withdraw themselves, or if they have previously been withdrawn by their parents or carers, they can choose to return to collective worship at that age. In Scotland, the law was very recently updated to say that children's views should be taken into consideration in terms of withdrawal, and that if they are withdrawn, an educational activity must be provided for those children to do at that time. And also it's worth noting that teachers in some types of schools are also able to withdraw themselves wholly or partly from collective worship. Again, lots more details on that on the DfE circular if you want more information.
So, now that we've heard about the guidance around collective worship in England and Wales, let's move on to look at some of the myths that surround collective worship. So a really common misconception is that collective worship is the same as RE. This comes up all the time in schools, especially when people are new to the role or they haven't had any formal training. But legally, collective worship and RE are completely separate duties. They come from different parts of the Education Acts and they serve different purposes in school life. RE is a curriculum subject. It has programmes of study, progression, assessment and clear learning outcomes. It's about helping children learn about and from different religions and worldviews. Collective worship, on the other hand, is not curriculum. It doesn't sit within teaching and learning. It's a statutory requirement in its own right, a daily act of reflection that supports the school's ethos and shared values. It's about creating space to consider spiritual and moral issues, to explore your own beliefs, to develop a community spirit, and to reinforce positive attitudes. And because of that legal separation, collective worship is a different kind of space altogether, a moment of stillness, community and contemplation, a chance for children to pause and think. So when we say collective worship isn't the same as RE, we're not just talking about style, we're talking about two distinct legal responsibilities with very different purposes. One is curriculum and one is reflective, and it's important to understand the difference. It's also important to understand that collective worship time does not count towards your time allocation for RE. Your locally agreed syllabus will specify the amount of time that it expects to be devoted to the teaching of RE, and the collective worship time sits outside of this. Let's move on to another really common myth, and this one comes up in almost every school I work with. It's the idea that children have to participate in collective worship. Now, this is one of those assumptions that has just sort of lingered over the years. People imagine children being expected to say certain words, join in with actions, or take part in something that might not fit their own beliefs or their family's beliefs. But that's not what collective worship is meant to be at all. Collective worship should always be invitational, never compulsory. That's the key word. We invite children to join in. We don't require it. And that shift in mindset makes the whole thing feel much more inclusive and respectful. So children should always have the freedom to choose how they engage. Some will join in really enthusiastically, some will sit quietly and reflect, and some might simply listen. And all of those responses are completely valid. And because the children can respond in the way that feels right for them, so quietly, reflectively, or not at all, it means worship becomes a genuinely safe and comfortable space for everyone, regardless of background or belief. Inclusivity comes from offering choice, and so when we remove pressure and expectation, we create a moment that every child can access in their own way. Let's look at another myth now that I think causes quite a lot of worry for teachers, and that's the idea that collective worship has to be overtly Christian every single day. And this is something teachers often say when they're feeling unsure or when they've inherited a very traditional model of worship, but that's not what the law actually requires. The wording is that within each school term, the majority of acts of worship must be wholly or mainly of a broadly Christian character. So we're talking about the overall pattern across the term, not daily. And that phrase, broadly Christian, is really important. It doesn't mean you have to reference a Bible story every morning. It simply means drawing on values that sit within the Christian tradition. So things like hope, compassion, forgiveness, courage. These are values that children of all religious and non-religious worldviews can connect with. It also means that you've got the freedom to use stories, themes and ideas from many different traditions as a stimulus. So for example, a story from Sikhi, a folktale from Ghana, a moment from nature, a poem. All of these can spark reflection in a way that still fits within that broadly Christian framework across the term. And because there's flexibility built in, worship can genuinely reflect your school community. If you've got a diverse intake or particular local traditions or a strong values-led ethos, you can shape worship so it feels authentic and meaningful for your children. So just before we begin to look at what collective worship might look like in practice, I'd like to consider this idea. Some educators use the word worthship as a way of reframing collective worship. Instead of thinking about worship in a religious or liturgical sense, worthship focuses on the idea of giving time and attention to things we consider worthy, things that matter to us as a community. And I think it's helpful because it shifts the emphasis from religious practice to shared values. It helps teachers understand that collective worship isn't about teaching belief, it's about pausing to reflect on what is important. It makes the concept more accessible for children of all worldviews, both religious and non-religious, and it aligns beautifully with the legal requirement for worship to be reflective and values-based.
Now that we've explored the myths, let's look at what collective worship actually looks like in practice. So there are lots of different ways to shape worship, but a really helpful way to think about best practice is through these 6 guiding principles, the 6 I's. We're not going to go into huge detail just yet, but here's the big picture. Collective worship should be invitational, so children are never pressured. Involving, so there are opportunities to participate if they want to. Informative, so it offers something to think about. Interesting, so it captures attention. Inspiring, so it sparks a sense of meaning. And inclusive, so every child can access it. These 6 ideas give us a simple framework for creating worship that feels warm, thoughtful, and genuinely meaningful for children. We're now going to explore these 6 I's and think about what each one might look like in a real primary setting.
So let's start with the first of our guiding principles, invitational. This one really sets the tone for everything else. When we say collective worship is invitational, we mean it's something that's offered, not imposed. It's an open invitation to pause, reflect, or join in, but never a demand or an expectation. And I think that's important because it protects children's freedom of thought and belief. It means worship is a safe space where everyone can choose how they engage. And some children might want to join in fully. Others might prefer to sit quietly and think, and both are absolutely fine. The language we use also makes a big difference here. Instead of saying things like, let's all pray together, we might say, you might like to take a moment to think about, and then whatever it is, or let's pause and reflect. And I think those small shifts make worship feel genuinely inclusive and respectful. I think being invitational is about creating space, not filling it. It's about saying, you're welcome here, just as you are, and letting the children decide what that moment means for them.
When looking at involving, this means giving opportunities for all to take part. This enables pupils to develop skills through engaging in the planning, leading, and evaluation of collective worship in ways that lead to improving practice. Pupil worship leaders should be supported, encouraged, and resourced to contribute meaningful acts of worship. There are examples here of collective worship timetables, ensuring there is a range of opportunities, for example, class or key stage, whole school, hymn practice, visitors, and a whole school celebration, usually at the end of the week. Some schools like to theme their worship, for example, a certain time of year or event, such as a festival or celebration, or linked to their school values. You could also think about having different pastoral ways to group pupils, for example, houses, key stages, whole school. An activity you could do as a Church of England school is where each class have their own class prayer book, where at the beginning of the school year, and even each half term, the pupils write their own prayers, so during your class worship sessions, the teacher picks a prayer from the book to end the session with.
Our next I is for informative, and collective worship should primarily be an educational activity, distinct from worship within a faith community. It should support the personal development of all pupils, including those of any or no faith. So planning weekly or termly themes can provide meaningful cohesion, as well as broadening and deepening pupils' understandings across these periods of time, as different members of staff leading the sessions can approach them from different perspectives. Common themes might be your school's vision and values, Christian values such as love, humility, kindness, stewardship, compassion, joy, British values, and also protected characteristics. We can help pupils understand these big ideas in an age-appropriate way through lived examples, stories, and images. It can also be an opportunity to reflect on current events or significant people from the past and present within the context of those themes, as well as to help pupils connect with places, events, and issues that are relevant to your locality. This could include inviting visitors from local faith communities or charities into your school. Many schools also use this time together as a whole school community for an opportunity to encounter festivals and special days, both religious and secular, especially where they're related to universal themes of, for example, light or creation, nature and forgiveness. Collective worship can provide a way of celebrating differences, but also recognising connections and things that are universal to all of us. It supports you to recognise religions that might not be part of your RE curriculum, but they are represented within your community, and that can really be something that helps to build belonging for your pupils and for your staff. So an example is the month of November, when we have events that include Anti-Bullying Week, Interfaith Week, World Kindness Day, Children in Need, and the anniversary of the birth of Guru Nanak. So a theme of kindness for a week or two, or even the whole month, would encompass all of those opportunities to also explore stories from the life and teachings of Jesus in the New Testament, or inspirational people from the past and present and within your local community. Collective worship also allows all pupils to reflect on what they've learned and how it impacts their beliefs and opinions. It helps them to understand their place within your school community, within the local area, and as a global citizen.
Collective worship should be interesting, and by that we're not talking about making it all singing, all dancing, or complicated. We're talking about capturing children's natural curiosity. It simply means offering something that engages them enough to pause, listen, and think. So whatever you decide to choose should spark curiosity. So that could be a short story, an object, a question, an image, a sound, a coloured cloth, something that makes children lean in a little and wonder. It should feel relevant because children connect more deeply when the theme links to their real lives, so things around friendships, fairness, courage, kindness, or when it's about feelings that they may have had experience of. So the images on screen now are from a collective worship that I did around loss. It's the empty chair, and it can be found on the Prayer Spaces website. The children were invited to write the name of someone or something that they have loved and lost and place it on the empty chair around the table. And it was a really moving experience, and just the example of the pupil voice on screen echoes this, I think. So someone had written, "I thought about my Nana. I miss her smile and her bags of sweets. When I see a mint humbug, I think of her. Love you, Nana." And I think that's just so beautifully poignant. Collective worship doesn't need to be long. A simple, well-chosen stimulus is often far more effective than a long talk. So one idea, one moment, one question is often enough. It should feel different from a lesson. Interesting worship has a slightly different tone. It's calmer, more reflective, a bit more spacious. It's not about teaching content per se. It's about offering something meaningful to think about, and which invites the children to make their own meaning. Collective worship should stimulate thinking and give children the opportunity to ponder on what they've experienced. And I found that this works well, especially when I planned the collective worship to engage all of the senses. So let's explore this idea of engaging all the senses in a little bit more detail and place it in context. So this collective worship that you can see on screen now was when I was working in a Catholic school, and we were exploring the new prayer and liturgy directory, which is called To Love You More Dearly. And this directory is designed for Catholic schools in England and Wales, and it endorses a 4-part structure for collective worship, which is often known as celebration of the word. And the structure is gather, word, response, and mission. And that last one is also known as go forth. We were using the resource by the Diocese of Leeds, which is called Virtues to Live By, as a way of structuring and timetabling the themes for worship. So the virtue that is explored here is perseverance or resilience, and the statement is, I will not give up. I will have faith and hope even when things are difficult. I always started with the scripture that I was going to use to explore the virtue, and in this case it was the marvellous catch of fish from St. John's Gospel. So the multisensory elements were all around the sea and the seashore, and to that end we had a focal point for the collective worship, which was a blue cloth, some sand, some salty water, a net with fish in that the children had prepared prior to collective worship, a running water feature, and scented oils in diffusers which were evoking the smell of the sea. So the sensory elements of sight, sound, taste and smell were all considered as we gathered. The gospel story was then read, and the children were invited to think about which parts of the story were about perseverance or resilience. We played The River Flows by Urena, whilst the children were invited to make their response by simply touching or mark making in the sand, or using shells to create an image or write a word. And the thinking was around how they felt the friends of Jesus felt when they persevered and followed his instruction to cast the net out on the other side. And we linked this to the mission of trying to persevere when things become difficult. The children were invited to repeat the virtue statement, I will not give up, I will have faith and hope even when things are difficult, to themselves quietly or in their heads. You can see some of the photos of the collective worship on screen now, including the range of responses that were left in the sand.
Pupils and adults can expect the worship that they encounter in school to be inspirational, where you inspire a sense of meaning. I've broken this down into 4 areas to think about. Wondering and questioning. Collective worship should enable pupils and adults to ask big questions about who we are and why we do what we do. Silence and contemplation should offer the opportunity to be present, experience stillness, and reflect. Emotional and intuitive responses should encourage pupils to think meaningfully about their faith, beliefs, and/or philosophical opinions, religious or not. Personal meaning making should allow pupils to engage with a worship experience that reflects their individual journey. As stated by the Church of England, in church schools, collective worship should offer the opportunity, without compulsion, to all pupils and adults to grow spiritually through experiences of prayer, stillness, worship, and reflection. It should motivate pupils and adults into action, into thinking differently, and into reflecting on their and the wider community's behaviours and actions. As a result of inspirational collective worship, they should be inspired to become courageous advocates of causes. This also links to the SIAMS inspection, Q5, where the question is, how does this culture encourage justice and courageous advocacy, enabling pupils to make ethical choices and to be agents of change? So where courageous advocacy is a big part of being a Church of England school and encouraging the children to be agents of change.
So our final I is inclusive. Collective worship is for all pupils. Although there is the right of withdrawal, we do want all pupils, all staff to feel comfortable enough to be present. There's a real power in bringing your school community together to hear a shared message or take part in a communal experience. We do need to consider how to support pupils with SEND or additional learning needs, especially if those are sensory needs. We need to consider what adaptations might be made in terms of how to position those children in the room, how to support them with any sound or visuals that the session will involve, and do they need an extra adult with them? Personal development and SMSC, social, moral, spiritual and cultural development, are rights for all children. Our most disadvantaged and vulnerable learners are often the ones who feel less of a sense of belonging in school. So please try not to remove them from opportunities to strengthen that. Consider the timing of interventions or catch-ups for all your pupils. What are they going to be missing out if they are not in your collective worship sessions? It might not be a learning objective or an academic point, but it is that sense of belonging, that sense of being in the room with their peers and hearing that important shared message. We can also think about how we use our collective worship to be more representative of Christianity as a diverse living global faith. For example, did you know that there are more Christians living in Nigeria than all of Europe? You could include facts like these, or case studies, prayers or worship, songs, art, or other images from Christian communities around the world. Festivals such as Christmas, Epiphany, and Easter are times when you could encounter different ways of celebrating these. And also consider how these global Christianities are present within the UK and often even within your own locality. They're not just something other or elsewhere. For some of our pupils who come from Christian families originating from Ukraine or the Caribbean or China, the Philippines or Nigeria, the Christianity they experience in school can be very different to what they experience in church or on a Sunday with their families or communities, and that can lead some children to feeling like there's a right and a wrong way to express their faith. How can we use our collective worship to show them that they belong to, that their faith is important and that they are represented? Kind of comes back to that idea we often talk about in RE with mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. We can also think about how collective worship is inclusive of different faiths and traditions, including non-religious worldviews. Protected characteristics can be introduced and encountered in an age-appropriate way through our collective worship sessions too.
Music can be used generally in collective worship, so for example played as the children enter and exit the space for worship, but music and sound can also become the hinge of the whole worship, shaping the atmosphere and helping everyone move into a reflective, attentive state. And I think when we use sound in this way, it becomes more than decoration. It becomes the stimulus that opens the space for thinking, wondering, and being still. This approach also allows us to draw on sounds from a range of traditions, not as acts of prayer, but as inclusive sensory experiences that help all children, whatever their background or belief, to pause, breathe, and reflect together. And that's where the Om sound can be really powerful when it's used as a stimulus, a sensory moment that helps children settle, focus, and become still. Om is a sound that many people around the world associate with calm and connection. Some traditions describe it as a sound that represents the universe, a kind of gentle vibration that helps people feel grounded. In our worship context, we're simply using it as a sound that supports reflection. And the key thing here is that it is invitational. Children aren't asked to chant it or join in. They're simply invited to listen. The sound itself does the work. It slows breathing, softens the atmosphere, and helps create a sense of shared calm. Instead of just filling the space, it can shape the space. And we can also use Om to explore universal human values, whatever the children's background or beliefs. So if your collective worship is on the value of kindness, you might first focus on atmosphere. You might dim the lights slightly, place a candle and a simple object like a flower or a smooth stone or a bowl of water where everyone can see it, and let the room settle. You might say, we're going to take a moment to be still together. And to help us settle, we're going to listen to a sound that many people call the sound of the universe, a sound that represents calm, connection, and belonging. And then you can play one gentle Om sound for about 5 to 10 seconds, which can be found online. I think I used to type in Om chanting and then follow the links. Let the sound fade naturally, and you might say, as the sound fades, you might wish to notice how it feels. The vibration, the calm, the sense of space it creates. You don't need to do anything, just breathe. And then pause. Invite the children to notice the quiet, their breathing, the feeling of themselves seated on the floor, the sense of being held in a shared moment. And then you could introduce the value. So in this instance, kindness. So say something like, today we're thinking about kindness. Kindness is one of those things that connects us, a bit like the way the sound we heard seems to fill the space around us. A kind word, a smile, a small act of help, they ripple outwards just like sound waves, and they can change someone's whole day. Then another pause, and then say again to the children, you might like to think of kindness as something that moves through the world, quiet, gentle, and really powerful. And use Om again as a reflective anchor. So say something like, as you listen again, you might like to think about a moment when someone showed you kindness, or a moment where you showed kindness to someone else. Play the sound once more, and then leave a short silence. Then bring the worship to its conclusion, saying something like, as we finish, you might like to carry this calm feeling with you into the rest of the day. When things feel busy or difficult, you can pause, breathe, and remember it's good to show kindness to others. Then snuff out the candle and watch the smoke billow, spreading out and filling the space. In my experience, the children are entranced by this action, and it seems to flow beautifully into quiet, respectful exits. So I think used in this way, Om becomes a reflective anchor. It gives children a moment to pause and think about the value you're exploring, not in a rushed or pressured way, but in a calm, spacious way that feels safe and accessible, and it supports well-being, emotional regulation, and spiritual development really well. If you're looking to create a collective worship on the value of forgiveness, then using drama as a stimulus can be very effective. I don't mean performance when I talk about drama as a stimulus. I mean using a simple drama technique to help children step inside a moment and understand a value more deeply. So in the case of exploring forgiveness, a freeze frame can be used as a way of imagining how people feel and how relationships can be repaired. If you're introducing freeze frames for the first time, then I think it's worth taking a moment to explain to the children that a freeze frame is like a living photograph, and we're going to be focusing on the moment when someone chooses to let go of hurt and make space for peace again. Then you can set the scene. So two friends have had an argument. One has said something unkind, the other walked away upset. So you might ask for 4 volunteers to create the freeze frame. So one child could stand with arms folded, looking hurt. Another looks worried or guilty. A third watches from nearby. And someone else looks unsure what to do. You might need to guide your volunteers into position and be prepared to model suggestions yourself if the children are unsure. Once they're in position, they hold the image and you invite those watching to consider what each person might be thinking or feeling. Then you invite each person to step out of the freeze frame and say one sentence about what they're thinking. So responses could include things like, I feel upset. I didn't mean to hurt them. I want to help, but I don't know how. I wish they would talk to each other. And again, you could prompt or model if appropriate. Then move into transforming the scene by imagining what forgiveness could look like in this moment. So invite your volunteers to change their position just a little to show forgiveness beginning to happen. So someone might take a small step forward. Someone might unfold their arms. Someone might offer a handshake. Someone might smile. And the new freeze frame is then held, and you invite the children to observe the new image and see the difference. Those tiny changes in body language, a small gesture, and the whole scene feels different. Then this could lead into a brief reflection along the lines of forgiveness. And the idea is that forgiveness doesn't always happen in a big, dramatic way. Sometimes it begins with a small step, a smile, or a handshake. It means choosing to move forward, choosing peace, choosing to try again. And you can, if you want to, take this reflection forward into a worldview story if you thought that was appropriate. So in Christianity, for example, there's the story of the prodigal son, which shows a father who welcomes his son home with open arms, even after mistakes have been made. And it's a powerful picture of forgiveness and reconciliation. And in Sikhi, the gurus teach that forgiveness is a sign of inner strength. Stories from the lives of Guru Nanak and Guru Arjan show calm, compassionate forgiveness even when they were treated unfairly. In Buddhism, there's a well-known teaching story about 2 monks who carried a woman across a muddy puddle. One monk helped her and then let the moment go, and the other held on to his frustration for hours. And the story reminds us that forgiveness often means releasing the things we carry long after the moment has passed. Using drama techniques in collective worship also supports oracy, which is a focus for many schools because it gives children a safe, low-pressured way to speak, listen and respond. Through freeze frames or thought tracking or simple role play, children practice expressing their ideas, noticing others' viewpoints and using language to explore feelings and values. Art can be a powerful way to open up reflection in collective worship. It gives children something to look at, wonder about and respond to without needing words. Art can create stillness, spark curiosity and help children connect emotionally with a theme or value. Now, art in worship doesn't need to be complicated. It might be figurative art, a single image or a group of people. It might be a pattern, a colour wash, a symbol, or a piece of children's artwork. The aim isn't to analyse the art, but to let it become a doorway into reflection, a moment where children pause, notice and think. I think if you use figurative art, then the art can create relationship because children can see expressions, body language, closeness, distance, tension, comfort, all the things that help them understand a value in a human way. And it also allows them to step into the scene without using freeze frame. Because art is visual and non-verbal, it's also a safe way to include traditions beyond Christianity, I think, because many worldviews express ideas through colour, pattern and design, and we can use these respectfully without representing sacred figures. I've had some really powerful collective worships using Islamic calligraphy, using some examples that you can see on screen now. The calligraphy acts as a kind of visual anchor so that the children can reflect on a particular value, and the shapes, colours and lines help them to stay with the value quite effectively, I think. The children can be invited to respond either quietly and internally or give a simple spoken response like, the value feels like this colour or this shape because, and then continue the sentence. Make a gestural or physical response like tracing the pattern in the air with their finger, or there could be a creative response such as drawing their own small pattern linked to the value.
SIAMS. So if you are a Church of England school, you will have a SIAMS inspection every 4 to 5 years. You can look at their documents online for the SIAMS framework, as well as a self-evaluation form which you can use as an audit. It can help you to break down the expectations and to answer the questions, providing evidence for your inspection. Within the SIAMS inspection expectations, IQ3 states, how is daily collective worship enabling pupils and adults to flourish spiritually? So broken down, the inspectors will look at how do the theologically rooted Christian vision and the foundation of the school shape worship and spirituality? Things they may look at here include your vision and the ethos around the school, your collective worship plans, how it links to your vision, how you promote or give opportunities for spirituality. And if you are a part of Jigsaw for PSHE and or RE, spirituality is a huge part of this, so that can help you answer that question. How do partnerships with the Diocesan Board of Education and or the Methodist Academies and Schools Trust and partnerships with the parish or local churches enhance this? So for example, do you have visitors from the local parish or church? Does your RE lead join diocese support like network meetings? And how do these help to enhance your collective worship? In what ways is the worship life of the school inclusive, invitational and inspirational? So we have helped you to answer that question and to have a look at that in today's webinar. What do pupils and adults understand to be the meaning of spirituality? How does this enhance and enrich collective worship and individual spiritual development? So SIAMS may want to meet with members of your staff to ask these questions, so you want to be prepared. Think about behaviour in your school vision and values, everyday school life, as well as outside of school as well. And how does the Trust contribute to and enhance the school's worship and spiritual life? So if you need any support with your SIAMs, your local RE advisor can give you that. Or if you were a Jigsaw RE school, you've also got the option of your regional advisor to offer support as well. There are lots of different people around that can support you if you are due SIAMs. So what does Jigsaw RE provide to support all schools with collective worship and spirituality? So our assemblies fit the collective worship requirements. We have planned, resourced and able to be managed within the school's collective worship timetable. We promote spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. We provide Bible readings and prayers for church schools, and these are incorporated into the assembly overview for each half term. And this integration acknowledges and incorporates elements of traditional worship, meeting the requirement for a broadly Christian character in collective worship. The inclusion of a Calm Me feature, utilising the Jigsaw chime from the Jigsaw PSHE programme, adds a reflective and contemplative aspect to the assemblies. This aligns with the aim of providing opportunities for pupils to experience reflection, contemplation and contributing to their spiritual development. The assemblies reference worldviews associated with the RE themes, providing insights into what various belief systems would say about the covered topics. This aligns with the legal requirement that collective worship should aim to provide the opportunity for pupils to consider spiritual and moral issues and explore their own beliefs. It also addresses the multi-faith aspect in school communities. Assemblies are designed to align with Jigsaw's inquiry-based learning approach, fostering intellectual development by encouraging pupils to interpret beliefs, symbols and stories. This intellectual engagement meets the aim of collective worship to contribute to the holistic development of pupils. The Jigsaw RE assemblies effectively meet the collective worship requirements by offering a versatile and thoughtful approach to exploring religious and ethical themes, integrating elements of traditional worship and aligning with broader educational objectives. Jigsaw is committed to ensuring that collective worship aligns with legal requirements, promotes inclusivity, and contributes to the holistic development of all pupils. You can see here on the screen that we have a 2-year cycle, half-termly themes linked to the Jigsaw PSHE puzzles, as well as resources to guide you in leading your collective worship. Again, if you do need any support as a Jigsaw RE school, the team of regional advisors are here to support you with that too. We have now reached the end of our webinar. If you would like to contact us, there are the Jigsaw details here below. If you are already a Jigsaw RE school, or if you become a Jigsaw RE school, you can also get in touch with your local regional advisor for support with your collective worship RE curriculum, and if you have any questions, you can find our email details when you log into the portal. Thank you very much for joining us for our webinar today. We hope that this has helped you to feel confident in planning and delivering your collective worship.